Nicholas reached his front door just before sundown, moving carefully like a man whose stitches reminded him to slow down, the hospital band still warm on his wrist, the green travel jacket damp from a sudden drizzle that smelled like the ocean. He paused at the threshold and listened to his house breathe. The faint hum of the fridge, the distant rush of waves, the echo of empty rooms. He had been gone for 3 weeks, a dangerous surgery that could have ended everything. He wanted quiet. He wanted tea. He wanted the simple comfort of his own chair. Instead, his son Matthew stepped into the entry with a grin that asked to be forgiven before he spoke. "Thanks to your beach house," Matthew said, lifting his phone like a toast, "my wife will get to know the Bahamas." The joke hit like a slap delivered with a silk glove. Nicholas set down his overnight bag, unbuttoned the jacket, and looked at the face he had raised alone after his wife died. The face the world now called Billionaire, restless, clever, impatient with limits. He did not shout. He did not ask why. He surprised even himself. He laughed, low, clear, almost kind, and saw the grin on Matthew's mouth falter. "What's so funny?" Matthew asked, and his voice had a thin crack in it. "Because Nicholas said, and let the sentence hang in the air like a hook. He shrugged off the jacket, hung it on the brass hook he had installed 20 years ago, and walked to the kitchen, making each step deliberate. The house remembered him. Lights came on with soft clicks. The kettle went on the burner with a familiar chime. 2 mugs slid from the shelf with a quiet knock of porcelain on wood. "Sit," he said. "Tell me from the beginning. Do not dress it up. Start with the day of my surgery." Matthew sat at the small oak table by the window. The sky outside showed a thin line of gold over the water. He laced his fingers and then unlaced them. He looked like the boy who once tried to fix a broken model airplane with tape and hope. "Sophia was scared," he said. "She cried. She said if anything happened to you, we'd be trapped. Probate, taxes, hospital bills, everything frozen. She said the Malibu place was a small piece of the portfolio and a fast sale would give us breathing room." Nicholas set a tea bag in each mug and listened without blinking. The kettle began to murmur. "Who brought the buyer?" he asked. "Sophia," Matthew said. "She said a friend knew a man who wanted coastal property and could pay fast. We met a notary named Morrison in his downtown office. He said the paperwork was in order. He talked about a power of attorney that you signed years ago. He said it let me act if you were incapacitated." The kettle's whistle rose, and Nicholas lifted it before the sound turned sharp. He poured. Steam washed the space between them. "Power of attorney," he repeated in a flat tone, tasting each word. "Describe what you signed." Matthew spoke in quick pieces, as if speed could make facts smaller, a sworn statement that Nicholas was temporarily unable to make financial decisions because of surgery, an authorization to sell on his behalf, a purchase and sale agreement with a price that made Nicholas's hands still, a first wire for $200,000, the rest due after inspection. $200,000, Nicholas said softly, as if naming a moth pinned to a board. He did not say that the glass wall alone cost more. He did not say that a permit board had taken 2 years to grant the short-term rental license that allowed limited weekly stays at full market rate. He did not say the mooring permit, or the private stair, or the film location contract that turned Sunset into revenue each summer. He looked at his son and asked the only question that mattered now. "Why did you not wait to ask me?" Matthew flinched. "They said time was the issue," he said. "Sophia said the buyer had other options and would walk if we didn't sign that day. She said hospital liens could attach to assets if bills exceeded coverage. She said waiting could cost millions." Nicholas slid 1 mug across the table. "My insurance?" he asked. "Private," Matthew said. "But she showed me estimates for complications. Numbers I did not understand. She said we should be safe." Nicholas tapped a finger once on the table. The sound was small and final. "And the account where the rest of the funds were to go?" "Sophia handled it," Matthew said. He would not meet his father's eyes. "She said the buyer preferred a special arrangement for tax reasons. I saw only the first confirmation. She booked our trip that night. She said we deserved a honeymoon after postponing 3 times." Nicholas let the tea steep. He let the details line up in his head like fence posts along a ridge. A notary with a loose reputation, a power of attorney he had never granted, an emergency that made quick hands move without asking questions. A first wire that soothed guilt, small enough to feel like a deposit on a future still intact. "Where is Sophia now?" he asked. "Nassau," Matthew said automatically. "She sent a photo by the pool. She said, 'Paradise at last.'" The corner of Nicholas's mouth moved. It might have been a smile or the shadow of one. "Paradise at last," he repeated, as if the phrase were a code he had heard before. "And the notary, Morrison. Did he check my ID? Did he speak to me? Did he confirm my signature in person?" Matthew's brow pulled tight. He said hospital cases are handled differently. He said if a close relative signs with evidence of incapacity, it's legal. He had copies of something with your signature. "He had copies," Nicholas said. He finally sipped his tea. It was too hot, but he did not react. He looked at the hands that had built his life. Hands that planted when he had nothing. Hands that signed when he had something. Hands that now held steady when he needed his son to see clearly. "You know valuations," he said, and kept his voice level. "You move money around the world in minutes. Yet you sold a house you did not understand to a man you did not know because a woman you love said time was the enemy." Matthew's throat worked. "I thought I was protecting you," he said. "I thought I was protecting us." "From what?" Nicholas asked. "From waiting a single day?" He placed the spoon down and watched it stop spinning. "Tell me the buyer's name." "Daniel Rodriguez," Matthew said. "He shook my hand and said he loved the surf lines off Point Doom. He did not ask to see the mooring license or the permit file. He did not ask about the location contract. He said he trusted the market." "He trusted someone," Nicholas said, and the words had edges. "Father," Matthew whispered, and the word came out like a boy reaching for a rail in dark water. "Did I make a mistake I cannot fix?" Nicholas looked past him, to the window, where a strip of gold thinned to gray, to the doorway where his green jacket hung, to the hall where the old photographs of a young father and a small son climbed the wall like steps. He set his mug down with care. "The truth moves in a straight line when you let it," he said. "We will let it. But first you will tell me every word Sophia said about my signature. Every word Morrison used to calm you. Every promise the buyer made. You will not skip. You will not soften." Matthew nodded. He started talking again, slower now. And as he spoke, Nicholas heard small details that mattered. The wrong bank named for a safe deposit box that never existed, dates that did not match, a sudden new email address Sophia used only for documents, a wire confirmation image that looked compressed and oddly cropped. The kettle cooled, the house settled, the ocean breathed. Nicholas did not announce any plan. He did not show the files he had already prepared. He held the last part of his sentence inside his chest where it warmed like a coal. "Because I knew someone would test the locks, because I changed the locks before anyone knocked, because I am still here to turn the key." Matthew started from the hospital morning and went step by step, and Nicholas made him slow down when he tried to jump ahead, because the only way to understand a wrong turn is to see every footstep that led to it. He said Sophia woke him at 5 a.m. the day of surgery, and said they had to be strong and practical, and she showed him a folder on her tablet labeled Emergency Estate Plan. And in it, there were scans with Nicholas's name and a typed note that said, "Temporary authority in case of incapacity." And he believed it because fear makes people accept neat documents. He said after the surgeon met them, Sophia cried in the hallway and told him hospitals can file liens if expenses explode. And she pointed to a blog post on her phone about families ruined by medical bills. And she said if they sold the Malibu beach house fast, nothing could hurt Nicholas's legacy. He said they drove to a small office downtown where a notary named James Morrison worked, a man with a big gold seal and a calm voice who said, "These cases are common, and the law lets a close relative act if there is evidence of incapacity." And he pushed 3 forms across the desk. A sworn statement that Nicholas could not make decisions during the procedure, a seller's authority letter, and a purchase and sale agreement with Daniel Rodriguez typed on the buyer line. Matthew said he did not read the long clauses because Sophia squeezed his hand and said, "Trust me." And Morrison said, "This is routine." And he signed where the yellow tabs told him to sign. He said the price on the agreement looked like $200,000 now and balance on inspection. And Morrison said the transfer could be split to meet buyer preferences. And Sophia nodded and said the buyer liked to stage funds for tax handling. He said they left the notary and drove straight to the beach house to take photos for inspection, and Sophia told him which angles to get: the view from the deck, the glass wall that slides, the path to the sand, and she sent the shots to a new email he had never seen, daniel.rconsult. He said at 4:11 p.m. a text came from Sophia that said, "First wire landed," with a screenshot of a confirmation for $200,000 into their joint account. And she kissed him and said, "Book it." And she booked flights to Nassau at 4:23 p.m. And by 8 p.m. she had a resort reservation. And he told himself this meant everything was safe and real. Nicholas asked what the notary did to check the power of attorney, and Matthew said Morrison held up a printed page with Nicholas's signature and a stamp that looked official. And he said he recognized the signature. And Nicholas asked if Morrison called the hospital or asked for a live voice or a video verification, and Matthew shook his head and said no. He only looked at papers and asked for Matthew's driver's license. Nicholas asked where Sophia said the rest of the money would go, and Matthew said she explained the buyer preferred an offshore trust account until the inspection closed for tax efficiency. And she said it was normal in large transactions, and she said she would manage it because he was too stressed. Nicholas did not interrupt when he heard that last part. He only told Matthew to keep going. Matthew said the next day Sophia told him the buyer had found minor issues that would delay the balance, nothing serious, and she told him to focus on his father's recovery. And then, 2 days later, she said the buyer upped the offer and would speed funds if she opened a special account. And he said he did not ask where because it sounded like good news. And then the surgery updates came, and he told himself to be grateful. Nicholas asked how long Sophia had known Daniel, and Matthew said she told him she had met him through a friend in real estate. No names, only you would not know them. And Nicholas asked for the notary's full name and address, and Matthew read it off his phone. James Morrison, Main Plaza, Suite 504. And Nicholas's eyes did not move, but Matthew felt the air change because his father was a man who could sit still and still say a lot. Nicholas asked if Sophia ever said which bank held the special account. And Matthew said first, she said First National. Then later, she said Wells Fargo when he asked again. And there was a short lag between his question and her answer, like she had to remember which story she told before. Nicholas stood, went to a drawer in the sideboard, and took out a thin gray folder with a blue tab. He set it on the table and told Matthew to read the title page. It was a medical directive, dated last year, with simple language and one firm line underlined. No power of attorney is granted to any party. All financial authority remains with the undersigned, unless a court declares full incapacity. Matthew looked up, and color left his face in one slow step. He said, "Then I signed on air." And Nicholas said, "You signed what someone put in front of you without checking the ground under it." He took out a second folder, thicker, black, with a red tab, and kept his hand on it like a lid on a pot. He said he had a question before he opened it. "Why did you not wait 1 day to ask me?" Matthew swallowed and said, Sophia told him there was only a small window and the buyer would walk away. And she said Nicholas would be too weak to deal with paperwork even if he woke up. And she said acting fast was a way of being a good son. Nicholas nodded once and then opened the black folder. Inside were clean, simple pages, forming a picture that even a tired mind could follow. He showed the filing that moved the beach house into an LLC with separate series, each one holding a different piece. One for the building and furniture, one for the coastal access and mooring permit, one for the short-term rental permit, and the film location contract. He showed the recorded covenant that said no transfer of the permits or the contract rights could happen without Nicholas's live signature in person with a second notary who was already named in the document. He showed a right of first refusal filed with a charity that had standing to sue if anyone tried to pretend the shell and the rights were one thing. He showed a one-page summary so plain that a juror could read it in a minute. The street address you know is tied to Series B, walls and furniture. Rights live in Series A and C and cannot move without Nicholas. Matthew traced the letters with his eyes like a man in the desert finding a map with water marked in blue. He said, "So when I sold a shell." And Nicholas said, "You sold drywall, not the tide." And his voice had no anger in it because facts carried their own weight now. Matthew asked about the money, and Nicholas said he had asked counsel to watch for any wires tied to a buyer shell connected to Daniel's name. And 3 days ago, a bank in the Cayman Islands flagged an inbound $2,000 to an account in a false name that matched Sophia's passport data by pattern. And a freeze request went in that morning with support from compliance. And the case would move faster if they had a clean recording where Sophia admitted key facts. Matthew stared at the table, and then he nodded like a man who had finally given up the last inch of a lie he told himself. He said, "I will help you record it." And Nicholas said, "You will help by telling the truth to the next person I bring into this kitchen." And he closed the black folder and put both hands flat on it and said, "Her name is Gloria. She used to be a detective. She is my attorney now. Tomorrow morning, she will explain what happens next." Nicholas stood and washed the 2 mugs even though they were barely used, and he hung the green jacket on the back of the chair to dry. And he told Matthew to send him every email, every text, every file Sophia sent. No edits, no delay. And Matthew began forwarding messages while Nicholas went to his home office and took a small digital recorder from the top drawer and placed it between them on the table without comment. He did not lecture. He did not list punishments. He only set the next step in a straight line and said, "We move at daylight." And his calm voice carried the small mystery that had started the moment he laughed at the door. The mystery of a father who had already built the fence long before the wolves arrived. Morning came gray and clean, and Nicholas moved through his kitchen like a man setting tools on a bench, not rushing, not wasting motion, while Matthew sat at the table with his laptop open and his phone buzzing with the tired light of forwarded emails. They ate toast and drank tea because complicated breakfasts waste thinking time. And then they built a timeline from what Matthew had said the night before. 5 a.m., hospital arrival. 9:40 a.m., Sophia's hallway speech about liens. 11:15 a.m., notary office with James Morrison. 4:11 p.m., first wire screenshot. 4:23 p.m., flights booked, all the way to the late messages that said, "Balance on inspection." Nicholas wrote times with a black pen and very small letters, and he made Matthew slow down on each point he tried to jump past, because skipping details is how people fall. At 9:05 a.m., the doorbell rang, and Gloria Martinez stepped in with rain on her gray bob and a flat leather case under her arm. She greeted neither like a friend nor like a stranger, but like a person who had work to do and was happy to do it. She put a small recorder on the table, a legal pad beside it, and she asked 3 short questions before she opened her case. "Any contact from Sophia this morning? Any attempt to log into accounts you share? Any calls from the bank?" Matthew said no to the first 2, and Nicholas said yes to the third. His private banker had emailed at dawn to say a compliance team in the Cayman Islands had acknowledged a freeze request for an account that matched the pattern they expected. Gloria nodded once, wrote "freeze acknowledged" in block letters, and then asked Matthew to hand over his phone and laptop for a quick check. She attached a small hardware key and cloned a narrow slice of data. Messages from Sophia, files named Estate, photos from the beach house, so that if anything was deleted later, they still had copies. She spoke plainly about what they faced and what they held. The Malibu beach house had been moved months earlier into a Series LLC called Blue Shore, split into 3 units, and only the building shell, the Series B piece, had names that a lazy reader would spot first. The rights that carried the real value: coastal access, mooring, short-term rental permit, film location contract, lived in Series A and C, and could not move without Nicholas's live, in-person signature before a second-named notary. And that condition was recorded in a covenant hard enough to stop any buyer who tried to pretend paper could carry what paper did not hold. "So the sale they rushed was a shell," Gloria said, tapping the legal pad with her pen. "And anyone who tries to flip that shell while claiming it holds rights will run into our injunction." She explained the sequence they would push today. File a notice to the county recorder that clarified, in plain language, that rights were separate and never conveyed. File a temporary restraining order to block any attempt by the buyer to represent Series B as containing A or C. Reach bank counsel to lock in the offshore freeze, and prepare a civil complaint that accused fraud, forged authority, and unjust enrichment, all presented with short sentences and clean exhibits that a judge could follow in 10 minutes. She did not promise revenge. She promised process. Then she turned to Matthew and gave him a narrow piece of work that was his alone. "Sophia will call when she sees the freeze," Gloria said. "When she does, do not accuse. Do not explain the law. Ask simple questions that make her choose answers. You want times, amounts, locations, and names. You want her to tell you which bank, which account, who advised the structure, how long she has known the buyer, who brought the notary, what document she claims gave you authority, where the original is kept, and whether she knew the house was split into series." She wrote those prompts in a column and slid the pad to Matthew. If she lies, let her. If she changes her story, ask why. If she admits, do not react. The recording can work for us only if you sound like a person trying to understand, not like a person building a case. She tested the recorder, clicked it off, clicked it on again, and set it next to Matthew's phone. There was a quiet, useful rhythm to the next half hour. Nicholas called his banker and confirmed on speaker that the freeze had a case number and an assigned officer. The banker said a FinCEN flag existed on a shell company linked to a Daniel R. The rest was confidential, but the tone said money laundering was in the air. Gloria called the county recorder to reserve a counter slot for an emergency filing and drafted a one-page memorandum that set out, in 3 lines each, the separation of Series A, B, C, and the covenant that blocked transfer of rights without live signature before notary number 2, already named. Matthew forwarded every message Sophia had sent him in the last month, and Gloria highlighted the ones where she shifted banks in her story. First National in one, Wells Fargo in another, and drew arrows between those lines and the lag times in her replies. Nicholas printed the hospital directive and laid it next to a copy of the supposed power of attorney that Sophia had flashed on a tablet. Even at a glance, any serious notary would see it was a photo of a faded form, not an original. And the signature angle was wrong, tilted up, not the down slope Nicholas's hand made when he signed in a hurry. The mystery that had made Matthew feel sick the night before, the sense that everything was too fast, too neat, began to shift into something else, a clear shape he could see and name. Gloria added one more layer that neither father nor son had voiced. 6 months earlier, when Nicholas first moved the house into Blue Shore, he had hired Gloria to watch the public record and the gossip that flows beside it. That did not mean illegal spying. It meant the slow, patient work of noting who searched which parcels, who asked clerks for what, which email addresses started turning up in online property forums. A new address, Daniel.R. Consult, had searched for Coastal Access Permit and Short-Term Rental Series LLC 3 months ago. And the same device had posted questions on a message board about how to value a house with separated rights. At the same time, a new Gmail created in Sophia's pattern asked a clerk about whether a spouse could sign for an incapacitated parent, and the clerk had replied with the correct answer, no, not without a court order. But that answer had not stopped someone from looking for a notary who would ignore rules. Gloria wrote 2 names on her pad, James Morrison, with a question mark, and Playa Vista Holdings, a Panama shell tied to an associate of Daniel's that had flipped coastal shells before. She said they would flag both with the court filing. While she spoke, Nicholas made one more call to a location manager for the summer film contract and gave a short instruction. All payments must route only to the trust listed in the covenant. No exceptions. No new wire instructions. And to call Gloria if anyone claimed to own the rights. He ended the call and looked at Matthew. "You handle the call," Nicholas said. "I handle the rest." Matthew nodded, and it sounded like a promise he had been wanting to make for years and had not found his way to until now. They rehearsed once, just the opening. Sophia asks if he is alone. He says yes. She says the money is frozen. He asks which bank. She says Cayman. He asks how much is in the account. She says a number. He asks when the buyer offered more. She answers. He asks where the original authority paper is. She tries to slide. He asks again. Gloria timed the beats and told him to leave air after each answer because people tend to fill silence with facts they did not plan to share. At 10:47 a.m., Matthew's phone vibrated. A message preview appeared. "Call me now. Emergency." He looked at his father. Nicholas did not touch him, did not give a speech. He only nodded once and moved the recorder closer so that a single red light sat between a son and the voice that had led him into deep water. Matthew pressed accept and put the call on speaker, and Gloria slid the recorder closer so the small red light sat between them. And Nicholas folded his arms and kept his eyes on the legal pad where the questions were written in clear lines. Sophia's voice came fast and thin, almost whispering and almost scolding at the same time. "Matthew, are you alone?" And he said yes, because that was the script. Then let 2 seconds of quiet pass, just like Gloria had told him. And Sophia rushed into the empty space with, "The money is frozen. The bank is asking insane questions. We need to fix this right now." And Matthew asked in a calm voice, "Which bank?" And he waited. Sophia said, "Bay and Keys Private in Georgetown." And he asked, "How much is frozen?" And she swallowed and said, "2 million. And Gloria underlined the number with her pen and wrote, "Amount admitted," and nodded once. And Matthew kept his tone low. "When did the buyer offer that extra?" And Sophia said, "After he saw the place," then corrected herself. "No, before closing, he wanted it off the books fast. It's a normal structure." And Gloria drew a small arrow that meant keep pressure on timing. Matthew asked, "Who told you to use that bank?" And Sophia said, "Daniel's counsel. It's standard. Trust me." And Matthew did not agree or disagree. He only asked, "How long have you known Daniel?" And Sophia said, "A few months." And her voice shook, then steadied. 5 months. We met through friends." And Matthew asked, "Which friends?" And the pause that came next was not silence. It was a calculation. And then she said, "People you do not know." And Gloria wrote, "No names." And Matthew moved to the next square. "Where is the original paper that gave me authority to sell?" And Sophia tried warmth first. "Honey, why are you doubting me?" And when that did not move him, she tried speed. "It's in a safe deposit box." And Matthew asked, "Which bank?" And she said, "First National." And he said, "Dad never used First National." And she said, "Sorry, I meant Wells Fargo." And the 2 beats it took her to switch were long enough for Gloria to circle bank switch twice. Matthew did not accuse. He asked, "Do you have the key?" And Sophia said, "Yes, your father gave me one the day before surgery." And Nicholas breathed once through his nose and said nothing. And Matthew asked, "Why would he do that if his directive says no power of attorney for anyone?" And Sophia said, "Your father is confused. Anesthesia can cause memory issues." And the way she said it made Nicholas think of how a person talks when they slide a card they have already used too many times. Matthew let the quiet open again, and Sophia filled it. "Listen, the buyer is nervous. He wants to move the shell again to protect himself. We have to sign a quick confirm. The rights go with the building anyway." And he asked, "Which rights?" And Sophia said, "Coastal access, rental, filming." And Gloria tapped 3 times to mark the list on the pad. And Matthew said, "Dad says the house was split into a series company." And Sophia went very still for one breath, then said, "Your father is a fox. He carved it up to make it hard to value." And Matthew said, "So you knew?" And Sophia said, "I suspected. It's common with high-end property, but it doesn't matter because Daniel already resold the building to a company that understands how to reunite the pieces." And Matthew asked, "What company?" And Sophia said, Playa Vista Holdings. And Gloria printed the words large, PVH, Panama, then wrote prior pattern beside it. Matthew shifted to the line that mattered most and kept his voice soft enough to sound like a man trying not to break. "Sophia, did you use a real power of attorney?" And Sophia said, "We used what we needed to use." And when he repeated, "Was my father's signature real?" she said, "Prove it wasn't." And the room felt smaller because in 4 words she had said more than she meant. And Gloria underlined "prove it" and wrote "admission by deflection." Matthew asked, "Who gave you notary James Morrison?" And Sophia said, "Daniel," then quickly added, "through a friend." And Matthew said, "Morrison never checked with the hospital. He never called Dad. He looked at a screen and stamped." And Sophia's voice sharpened. Stop playing detective, Matthew. You are making this worse. The bank is waiting for me, and I need you to come to Cayman today. Bring your passport. We will fix it in person. And Matthew said, I can't leave. Dad is back and weak. I need to care for him. And she switched keys again, from pressure to pity. How is he? Did the doctors say he is lucid? And Gloria lifted her eyes at the word because it had a job in the sentence. And Matthew said, he is lucid enough to ask why we sold without asking. And Sophia exhaled into the microphone, the sound of a plan bending, and she said, your father wants to control you. He never liked that we made independent decisions. He set a trap. And Nicholas took that as his cue, not to gloat, not to fight, but to end the guessing. And he stepped close to the phone and said, calm and clear, hello, Sophia. And the silence that followed said she had not planned for the target to answer. And she said, Mr. Hartley, in a smaller voice that still tried to carry disdain. And Nicholas said, this call is being recorded with my son's consent, and my attorney, Gloria Martinez, is present. And Gloria leaned to the mic and said her full name and license status so the record had it. And Sophia said, you cannot use this. It is private. And Gloria said, we can and we will. And Nicholas kept the line simple. You knew the building was in Series B. You took $2 million to a Cayman account under a false name. You tried to move a shell to a Panama company. You told my son to sign under a paper you knew would not stand in court. And Sophia said, you cannot prove any of that. And Nicholas said, you did, because each piece had just been spoken on tape. While they spoke, Gloria's phone buzzed on the edge of the pad, and she flicked her eyes down and saw an email banner from the bank counsel that read, freeze order confirmed, case no, attached. And a second banner from a clerk at the county recorder that read, TRO stamped, pickup ready. And she put her palm flat on the pad in a gesture that meant the road was now paved. Nicholas did not say, we have you, he said. Playa Vista will receive a notice before lunch that any attempt to represent Series B as having rights will be enjoined, and Bay and Keys will keep your account locked while they answer their own questions about Daniel's funds. And Sophia tried one more mask, the one with tears. Matthew, please, tell them I did this for us. Your father has millions. He would never notice. I wanted us to have a life. And Matthew finally let his anger through, and it sounded tired more than loud. You did this to me, not for me. You lied about banks. You lied about papers. You lied about amounts. And Sophia's voice turned to ice. Then you will drown with your father. And the line clicked as she cut it. The recorder's red light kept steady. Then Gloria clicked it off and wrote the time. And the kitchen felt wider again. No one cheered. They went back to the list. Gloria forwarded the audio to a secure folder and attached a typed summary. Bank name, amount admitted, timing contradiction, false safe deposit claim, notary source, series knowledge, Panama shell. Nicholas called his banker back and gave the case number so the freeze could be tied to the civil filing. Matthew opened his email and found 3 new messages from Sophia sent seconds after the call. One sweet, one angry, one that said, ignore everything I said. It was stress. And Gloria told him to archive them untouched because retractions from panic have their own value. At 11:30, they drove to the recorder's office in light rain, and Nicholas took a number and waited like any other citizen. And when the clerk called them up, Gloria slid the one-page memorandum, the covenant copy, and the TRO packet across the counter, and the clerk read the clean lines and nodded and stamped. They walked back to the car. And Matthew looked older and younger at the same time, and he said, what happens next? And Nicholas said, we serve, we wait, we do not blink. And he started the engine and pulled into traffic. And a gull lifted off a streetlight and followed the car for a few seconds, like a white mark leading them down a straight road. They left the recorder's office before noon and drove home in slow rain. And the rest of the day moved in straight lines because straight lines were safest now. Gloria emailed the stamped TRO to Bay and Keys Private with the freeze case number in the subject. Attached, the one-page memorandum that spelled out how Series A and C never moved, and copied a contact at Playa Vista Holdings that her files said handled inbound shells for Daniel. Nicholas called his private banker again and gave permission to share the recorded call with compliance. Matthew sat at the table and typed a clean statement in plain words. What he saw, what he signed, what Sophia told him, which bank names changed, while Gloria checked each sentence for dates and verbs that a judge could not bend. By 2 in the afternoon, Bay and Keys replied that the freeze was confirmed, that the account holder had attempted access twice since morning from a resort IP in Georgetown, that further attempts would be logged and reported, and that they would conduct a recorded interview within the hour. At 2:30, they sat in front of Nicholas's laptop and spoke to a calm compliance officer who asked only for facts. When did you learn the amount? When did you learn the bank name? Did you consent to a recording? Do you have the audio now? Will you send it? Gloria sent it while they were still on the call, and the officer said the words that meant the bank would not blink. We have reason to believe the declared source and the real source do not match, and ended with a case number and a promise to forward to their own regulators. At 3:10, a short email came from a U.S. attorney with a Miami area code representing Playa Vista Holdings. We have received your TRO. Please provide the covenant and series structure. Gloria sent the public filings and a single page that even a tired mind would grasp. Series B equals walls and furniture. Series A and C equal rights that never moved. Transfers of A or C require Nicholas in a chair before notary number 2, and added one sentence at the end. Any attempt to represent B as carrying A or C will open your client to sanctions. At 4, they served James Morrison at his small office downtown. He looked smaller than his gold seal and tried to talk at first, the way men in corners do, then stopped when Gloria said quietly that the state licensing board would read his stamp history against hospital visitor logs. He took the envelope and sat down hard. At 5, a message flashed on Matthew's screen from Sophia, then another, then a third. First soft, then hot, then a late attempt to say everything had been a misunderstanding. And Gloria told him not to touch them, not to reply, to let the words cool in their own time, because panic often writes proof. Night came without ceremony. They ate soup and toast again because complicated meals waste thinking. Nicholas slept in his own bed for the first time since surgery and woke once to the sound of rain and once to the sound of the ocean and once to the sound of his own breath slowing back to normal. The second day started with a call from a state investigator who asked for copies of the recording and the fake power of attorney image. Gloria sent them while she drafted the civil complaint. Fraud, forgery, unjust enrichment, declaratory relief, stacked with clean exhibits, 10 tabs, no extra flourishes. At 10:25, an email arrived from Playa Vista's counsel saying they had reviewed the filings and understood that their client purchased only Series B and that any claim to rights would be enjoined. At 10:38, a second email offered a stipulation: immediate rescission of the B transfer, a return of title to Blue Shore Series B, payment of Nicholas's fees to date, and no admission of fault. Gloria pushed for more because her job was to push. Confirmation that no representation had been made to any third party, that B carried rights, and a written notice to Daniel that he had been sold a shell. And by noon, she had both in her inbox with signatures. At 1, Nicholas and Matthew drove to the recorder again in stronger light and watched the clerk stamp the rescission. Matthew took a photo of the timestamp because sometimes a man needs proof he can hold in his hand. The money was a separate river. Bay and Keys kept the account locked while their review spun. At 3:20, a federal financial crimes agent called Gloria and asked for a copy of the audio and the timeline and the bank messages, and she sent them while the agent explained in dry language that Daniel's shells had tripped patterns before and that this recording would be logged as a first-person admission of funds flow. And while the agent did not promise arrests, he did promise a long memory. The third day brought smaller pieces that still mattered. The state licensing board took Morrison's statement under oath. He brought a folder with printed emails that showed exactly who asked him to be flexible and when. One of the addresses belonged to Sophia and one to a new Gmail that matched Daniel's pattern. Morrison said the words that meant he now wanted to be on the right side. I was misled, and signed a paper that let the emails be used without a fight. A studio location manager replied to Nicholas's earlier notice and agreed to route all payments only to the trust on the covenant and agreed to ignore any updated wire instructions. A concierge from the Malibu Association confirmed in writing that access rights belonged only to Series A by recorded covenant, and that any buyer claiming otherwise would be turned away at the gate. On the fourth day, Playa Vista filed its own notice disclaiming any rights to A or C, and, in a line that made Nicholas breathe easier, said it had notified all downstream parties that the building was a shell without rights. That same afternoon, Bay and Keys sent a formal letter that the $2 million would remain in legal custody while questions about source and purpose were answered. The letter gave an address where Nicholas's claim could be attached, and Gloria walked it over in person, so there would be no delay. That evening, Matthew stood on the balcony and did not check his phone for a long time. When he finally looked, there was a last message from Sophia that said she would go public and tell the truth about how Nicholas controlled everyone. He read it once, and then put the phone face down and let the ocean be the only moving thing. The fifth day brought signatures. In the morning, Nicholas signed the settlement that brought Series B home. At noon, he signed the attachment that linked his civil claim to the frozen funds. At 2, he signed a short addendum to his estate plan that said no asset could move without 2 signatures, his and Matthew's, or his and a named co-trustee if Matthew ever felt pressure again. At dusk, he wrote 3 plain lines on a single page and taped it inside his desk drawer, where a man would find it on a hard day. Ask me first. Wait one day. Never sign what feels rushed. The mystery that had hovered in the house, the sense that something unseen had been moving the pieces, did not vanish so much as come into focus. It was not magic, just a chain of small choices. A notary who liked easy fees, a buyer who liked fast shells, a woman who liked windows where other people were weak. Nicholas did not toast victory. He boiled water and made tea and stood beside his son while steam rose like a clean line into the air. Matthew said he would testify if anyone asked, that he would carry the weight he had made, that he would not let noise talk him out of slow truth again. Nicholas put a hand on his shoulder and left it there long enough for the message to sink in, and then they talked about small things: grocery lists, a leaky garden tap, when to walk. Because normal minutes are the measure of a repaired life. When the first check from the studio hit the trust that weekend, it felt like a tide going out and then coming back the way it always has. The green jacket dried on the chair. The stamp on the rescission cooled on the page. The ocean kept breathing. And in a quiet house where a single father had learned to be roof and floor, a simple rule sat on paper and in 2 men's bones: ask, wait, check, together.